Welcome to Norse Code, the number one podcast for your Minnesota Vikings. I'm your host and producer. My name is James Pagashnik. Thank you guys so much for listening. And at the other end of the tin cannon string, we have our analyst and co-host. You know him from numerous blogs and podcasts around the internet, most notably from theathletic.com. He is Mr. Useful Human, Arif Hassan. Arif, what's your favorite Kirk Cousins approved movie that he probably saw at a church lock-in?
I'm curious if you watched like all the Nic Cage movies or only the ones that he named, because like Raising Arizona would be phenomenal if it was on Kirk's list, but I imagine that it's not. So I'm probably going to have to go with Con Air. That's just so good.
So when he was talking about the movies that he was into in the presser, which we will definitely talk about, Absolutely. I was thinking about an episode of Brooklyn Nine-Nine where Jake Peralta ended up having to go into a safe house with Captain Holt's husband. And the only movies that were in the safe house were Nic Cage movies. And so the joke being that this stuffed shirt
that they're so refined. Yeah, oh my God.
Had to watch these movies. And was later referencing them because he had to sit and watch them. He was in the safe house for like a month. So I just thought about that and had a
people who haven't seen Brooklyn Nine-Nine, it's incredibly good.
There are a few really, really funny episodes in there and all that.
And the relationship that Holt has with his husband is so funny. Oh my God.
All right, well,
so good.
Welcome to this episode of Norse Code. Hope you guys are all doing well. We will be previewing the Panthers game here in just a moment with a special guest. But before we start, just want to thank you guys so much for listening to Norse Code. If you would like to donate to the show and support us and keep us ad-free, you can do so over at patreon.com/Norse Code. Patreon people will get a bonus episode here tomorrow. It's getting a little late to finish it up tonight. I got a couple little tweaks I got to do, but that bonus episode will be waiting for you tomorrow. It is a long bonus episode too, so I'm trying to make it up to you. So check that out. Plenty of pre-show stuff for you, or you can support the show over at paypal.me/NorseCode as well, or you can do what Kyle Slaby did this week and go to norsecode.threadless.com. and pick up the new line of Norse Code merchandise, including the Arif shirt that we have up. Get your Christmas socks now with the new logo on it, and also the original one is still up there as well. So check that out at norsecode.threadless.com. Again, we're not making much money on this, but it is just something that's kind of cool to have. And making money wasn't necessarily the idea behind it. It was more just so that we could have a little bit of merch out there and let you guys have a little bit of fun. So check that out. It should be really cool. Also, we will be doing a live show in Arlington, Virginia, on November 4th. Sometime between 7 and 8 is going to be the start time over at Ireland's Four Courts. We've been talking to them quite a lot the last couple days, and everything looks like it is a go. So between 7 and 8 at Ireland's Four Courts, which is a fantastic Irish bar over in Arlington, Virginia. And this is being done in coordination or in cooperation with the Facebook group, the Nova Vikes. So they're going to be out there. We're going to be giving out. We'll be giving out a free ticket. They're also going to be giving away some free stuff too. So check it out. It should be a lot of fun. Again, November 4th. This is with the Nova Vikes over at Ireland's Four Courts. And that is the weekend of the Ravens game that we're giving away our Ravens tickets. So check us out. That should be a lot of fun. Arif and I are really looking forward to it. And let's just get into the episode right now. We are going into a Panthers preview with Billy Marshall. He's been on the show a couple of times here, and he is from the Roar podcast. And they were previewing the Panthers game. So let's go to this interview that Arif taped earlier today.
Right, I'm here with Billy Marshall, who co-hosts the Roar podcast, which I was just on. I should have asked you before the show. I already forgot the name of your co-host. I'm sorry. I'm just bad with names. It's nothing about your co-host. What's your co-host's name?
Yeah, it's John Ellis, One Panther Place.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Actually, no, John rules. I can't believe I forgot that.
No worries.
Cool. Well, yeah, we're here to talk about the Carolina Panthers, who have a crazy good defense. Like, okay, I did not anticipate this heading into the season. Like, I understand they drafted like 7 defense, or the entire draft class was defensive players. But frankly, I was not expecting this at all. Like, I like Jeremy Chin. I like some of these players. I Did you expect this?
I expected the defense to improve. I did not expect them to be, second in DVOA after 5 weeks.
Yeah, and they're second in EPA as well. Buffalo is like by far and ahead first, I imagine, in DVOA, but in EPA per play. But the Panthers are a healthy second. They would be a much healthier second if it wasn't for how weird that Cowboys game was, which we'll talk about when we talk about the defense, which I actually want to start with because I think it's more interesting than the offense. But yeah, it's kind of crazy. I remember when Phil Snow was hired, a bunch of people were making jokes about why would you bring a Big 12 defensive coordinator in, which like fair, but seems to be actually pretty good. So let's talk first about the structure of the defense. There's a really good video that Brett Coleman does that I don't know how accurate it is, so you can tell me. But fundamentally, Phil Snow is incorporating elements of the 3-3-5 that he ran, adapting it to the fact that NFL offenses tend to be more compact, the fact that you've got different types of athletes in the NFL that happen to be a little bit bigger, although the Panthers are unusually small for a defense, and is running kind of a closed 4-3 from 3-4 looks where you've got, an edge rusher just kind of not even an edge rusher, just like bouncing inside the tackle and stuff like that. So first, have you seen that Brett Coleman video, the Carolina Reapers one?
I have not. No, I have read and viewed some other videos. Cody Alexander's breakdown is really good, but I'm sure it's a lot of the same principles and concepts.
Sure. Well, let's talk about how that defense is set up. So everywhere is light except for interior defensive line, where they tend to be a little bit heavier than the NFL average. You've got Declan Jones, Eric Brown. Both of those struck me as run stuffers. And there seems to be, I'm not going to say a trend, but there seems to be more of a movement in NFL defenses. The Vikings are doing the same thing to have players that are primarily run stuffers occupy both defensive tackle positions to kind of lighten the box a little bit. And the Panthers have the lightest linebacking core in the NFL, depending on how you measure it. And especially if you include Jeremy Chin, which, if you want to do that, he's in the box more than he's not. It seems to be that is the approach. Am I feeling that out correctly?
Yeah, so let's just go back to 2020 draft real quick. There was a lot of criticism when Carolina took Derek Brown because, myself included, why would you draft a nose tackle that high? Why don't you draft a corner or Isaiah Simmons? He was a popular local guy. But as time went on, watching them last season especially, Derek Brown, he does certainly get his pressures from the interior, but he's very important to their defense because of, like you said, the light boxes that he allows them to play with. So they can have more corners on the outside or in their personnel packages and diversify some of their looks at the line of scrimmage as well. So, from that standpoint, we can debate whether it was the right value or not and what type of kind of future he has with the team. I mean, to me, he's similar to a Star Lotulelei who was drafted, around the 13 to 14 range back in 2013. And so he's maybe not going to affect the passer as much as you'd like, but there's certainly a lot of he's just really, really, really strong. And I'm not sure how to measure that, but in the run game, especially when he's lined up as a one technique, when he's getting head up against centers and guards, he really controls the line of scrimmage well. Daquan Jones was a guy I really liked, in Tennessee for all those years. Came out of Penn State in 2015 or 14, and I thought that was an underrated signing too, because again, it allows them to really create those fronts that are predominantly really heavy. But yeah, it's just been kind of interesting to watch how the transition has gone just from last year to this year.
Yeah, so because last year, Bravion Roy was another nose tackle that was drafted in the same draft class. Jeremy Chin was there, obviously. Gross Matos was an edge rusher, although I don't think that he took all the edge rusher snaps there. Again, it was an entire draft class devoted to the defense. And it's a lot of the same players, obviously some new additions. We'll talk about them, player by player, of course. But this just seems like an enormous improvement in the level of defensive play. Is it that individually a lot of these players, like Derek Brown, have gotten better? Shaq Thompson, as a rookie, I thought was pretty rough.
Right.
and seems to be playing, better every year. Um, has he signed an extension yet? Because he should be up for one.
He signed one in 2019.
Oh, okay, yeah.
Like late, like right after Ron Rivera got fired. Like
Oh, okay.
it was like late that year. I think it was in December. He signed it before, like I think it was a Falcons game or something.
Right. So you've got players like that. It feels like it required a lot of individual improvement from some of the players. Obviously, again, brought in some players, but also like some schematic improvements. Is that, or is there just like defensive buy-in, or kind of what's driving a lot of this defensive improvement?
Yeah, so I would say certainly like the young veterans on the defense, Shaq Thompson and Dante Jackson, those guys have certainly improved. Jackson, he's been really good. I mean, that interception you saw last week was arguably one of the best interceptions I've seen.
It's incredible.
It was just, he was streaking down the field on a vertical route, then he flipped his hips, turned his head, and came back, on a wheel route. So his improvement coupled with Thompson and, some of the veterans they've also been able to sign, some of them haven't worked out. I mean, they moved on pretty quickly from like a Denzel Perryman, and
Right.
a few other guys that they signed. But like Morgan Fox, I felt like he was pretty underrated with the Rams. He's like kind of their 3-tech, their interior pass rusher.
Yeah, he does like a lot of 4-eye stuff. Like,
yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
He's pretty rough against the run right now, but I mean, as a pass rusher, he's really has like an arsenal of moves. So last year they did a lot of zone coverage, and this prompted a lot of people after they selected J.C. Horn to question why would they do that.
That's
Surtain
right.
might have been a better fit.
Yeah, I remember that. Yeah,
but like at the time, like their corners were Russell Douglas, Dante Jackson, and one of their rookies at the time, Troy Pride. So they really did not have much talent back there. So Phil Snow was essentially just playing to his players' strengths, a lot of zone coverages, a lot of spot dropping, and he didn't really want to kind of put a lot of pressure on them. So now with like the improvements in personnel, such as drafting J.C. Horn eighth overall, they signed AJ Boye, who's a pretty reliable veteran. Dante Jackson's improvement, and they were able to trade for C.J. Henderson, and we'll see what happens with Gilmore.
Right.
So I just think all of that allowed them to play what their defense is, a lot more man match principles, a lot more man coverage. They want to continue to blitz and get after the quarterback. Despite having a lot of decent talent in their front four, they want to stay true to their identity. And in my opinion, it cost them against Dallas in some ways. They obviously played better against Philadelphia, but we'll get to that in a second. But yeah, to me, I think it's just a combination of where they want to take this defense from a schematic standpoint, which is playing, like I said, a lot more man coverage and have those guys, those cornerbacks and safeties in the back end really hold up and continue to bring their diversity of blitz packages up front.
Yeah, well, let's talk about that. So the Panthers are number one in the NFL in defensive pressure rate, as measured by PFF. There's other organizations that do pressure rate like NextGen and SIS, but the one I looked up says that the Panthers defense is number one in the NFL in pressure rate, and I was able to, thanks to the resources that The Athletic provides me, parse it down a little bit more. The Panthers are the fifth most blitz-happy defense in the NFL right now, and that's unadjusted for down distance, etc. And then on pressure rate when just rushing 4 is third in the NFL. Pressure rate when just blitzing is fifth in the NFL. So no matter what they do, they find ways to create pressure. And you mentioned that there's a diversity of pressure packages. This is a good time to talk about those pass rushers. So we talked a little bit about those defensive tackles. They seem to be primarily run stuffers, people who are very strong, good at reading the running and getting to the running back, but they do a great job of rushing the passer. My good friend Bryce Rossler, who works at Sports Info Solutions, tweeted out that number 1 and 2 in time to pressure are Brian Burns and Hassan Reddick. Brandon Thorne responded in that thread, said, how much of that has to do with unblocked pressures, which he didn't have the data on hand for, but when you remove unblocked sacks, does change it a little bit, but they're both really fast to pressure. This tells me that they do a really good job of designing pressure packages that create either one-on-one matchups or unblocked pressure, even from people that we know to be pass rushers. What are they doing to unleash players like Brian Burns and Hassan Reddick, who are already, without that help, pretty good pass rushers?
Yeah, so I'm not sure if you've seen this clip, but there was a I've seen it posted a few times on Twitter. Go back to the Saints game. They brought the same blitz 3 times, and in all 3 plays affected Jameis Winston in various ways. I think the third clip was eventually a turnover. But essentially, like what they're doing is similar to what you guys see in Minnesota. They kind of mug the A gap with 2 linebackers, or sometimes they bring a safety such as Chin or one of their other guys back there, Franklin or Chandler. And so what they're trying to do in that situation is create overloads. So it's typical to like what you see in a normal like fire zone situation. You have 2 of the guys that are at the A gap, whether it's Chin or Thompson. One of them is going to back off into coverage, and they're just going to read where like the protection is going. So let's just say like the protection slides to Jeremy Chin's side. Chin is going to, in essence, just back off, and they read it. I'm not sure. I think there's obviously a lot more tells that they get when they're one of those 2 are going to be blitzing. And unfortunately, it bit them in the butt against the Eagles because they brought a similar type overload blitz, and late in the game, and Jalen Hurts found Goddard for like 20 yards. But essentially, like when they get it right, like it's pretty pleasing to watch because you just don't know who's coming. So it's very like it's based a lot on like where the protection is sliding. The Saints did a really poor job, in my opinion, of sliding protection. Their center was obviously missing that game, McCoy, who's like in charge of their protections. But you saw it in the same game or the previous week against the Jets, and some of it against the Texans as well. And when you have like speed rushers like Burns and Reddick, who are very, very good at getting off and just going to the quarterback, like you said, it creates a lot of stress for the defense. And I feel like teams are going to pick up on it. I know last year there was a similar type of, love with Brian Flores' blitzes and which guys come and which guys go. But for now, because I feel like the personnel, especially on the edge, works so well, I feel like they're really affecting the quarterback with these overloads. And that's just the key because teams are going to eventually find hot routes and slide the protection the correct way and pick it up. But for right now, it's working. And there's been a lot of interesting tweaks that they've put in, especially against the Eagles.
Yeah, you mentioned the fire blitz, which is a type of zone blitz that with man match principles in it. The Panthers right now are 7th in the NFL in zone blitzes per drop back, and because they're so blitz heavy, they also happen to be among the league leaders in blitzing with man coverage behind it, 6th in the NFL per drop back. And so there's a fairly even split. About 15% of dropbacks that they see are zone blitzes, 17% of dropbacks that they see are man coverage blitzes. These are kind of difficult to parse because sometimes the zones will end up looking like man and vice versa because of the nature of modern pass defenses. But that all adds up together to be one of the most blitz-happy groups in the league. And that creates a lot of problems, obviously, for quarterbacks. What have you seen from opposing quarterbacks as they try to figure out what's going on with these blitzes? Because when you see an experienced quarterback going up against a blitz, typically there's a really good shot that they'll have an opportunity to get rid of the ball to somebody who's wide open. In fact, Justin Jefferson said that today, that he knows it's a blitz-happy defense, and he relishes that because he sees one-on-one coverage. So how do quarterbacks kind of respond to Carolina's flavor of blitzing?
Yeah, so you got to go back to week 4 when I felt like Prescott and Kellen Moore they played it masterfully. They played it masterfully, in my opinion. And I think the main reason for that was not only were they running the ball extremely well, but they were able to kind of pick up on it. And it helps that their offensive line is great. And, they have the skilled players that they have. But at the same time, Prescott is one of the best in the NFL at getting the ball out of his hands quickly. And another thing that, happened in that game that I really didn't agree with is because Prescott is such an unbelievable quarterback within the pocket. Not only can he scramble and gain 10 yards up the field, but because he knows that Reddick and Burns are primarily speed rushers, he can manipulate the pocket very well. And what they did last week against Jalen Hurts, similar. Obviously, Hurts isn't the same stature of passer as Prescott, but he can't beat you with his legs at time. And because Phillies are very effective at throwing the screens, they asked their edge rushers to play much more contained. So when you did see Brian Burns have like many like truth rushes when he wasn't being asked to contain or spy. Same with Reddick. Reddick had a couple instances where he beat the guy just off the snap and got into the backfield. But Burns didn't look as good because he was trying mainly to beat their left tackle was Dillard with bull rushes and some inside moves. He really was not trying to beat the left tackle with speed rush because he didn't want to give up that gap. So because they got burned really badly against the Cowboys, they were much more disciplined in their rush lane. So, for a quarterback like Cousins, who maybe is, he's pretty good at manipulating the pocket. He's obviously not going to present the same type of rushing threat that maybe a Prescott presents, but I'm going to be curious because I feel like they might go back to what they did against the Saints, which is just rushing upfield and creating opportunities for those overloads. But at the same time, whenever you see like Hassan Reddick or Brian Burns dropping on a tight end, and it happened late in the game against Philadelphia, you don't want to see it, and sometimes coverages can bust in those situations like it did. There's obviously opportunities on the back end for Minnesota to exploit in those situations.
It's interesting. Yeah. So it might kind of also depend on whether or not there are any tells within the defense or among individual players about who might be dropping and who might be rushing. Because like you said, if you know that Brian Burns or Hassan Reddick are dropping in coverage, you'll be able to target that. Although Hassan Reddick probably better than most edge rushers when it comes to coverage, probably not the primary ability that you signed him for, despite what Arizona attempted to do when they drafted him. I mean, like that is kind of the case. I find it kind of interesting that the Panthers are relative to the rest of the league, kind of heavy in cover 1 and kind of heavy in cover 4. That seems to be the two flavors of coverage they use a little bit more often, but they tend to use all the different types of coverages. Again, somewhat difficult to identify because of the man-match principles that we tend to see in modern NFL defenses. But that should create some problems. But it does imply some interesting stuff about the back end, about the secondary, about what their capabilities are. So first, we should talk about some of the new additions that were not here at the beginning of the year. I want to know what you think of Stephon Gilmore, who I don't believe is suited up yet.
No, he's not. He's not going to be able to suit up until the next week.
Right. So we're not even going to see him. I want to know about CJ Henderson, what you think of him. I want to know kind of, who's holding down the fort, AJ Boya, Dante Jackson. I want to know about the 5th round pick. And then we'll talk about the safeties in a second too. But tell me about these corners.
Yeah. So, the group is led by Dante Jackson. He's in a contract year. Just his improvement from his rookie year until now has been kind of remarkable. And he played in a Dave Aranda defense. So he understands a lot of, the college principles of man-match principles and whatever
it's the
else.
Former LSU defense coordinator.
Exactly. Yeah. He's former LSU defensive coordinator. And he played like a lot of safety too at LSU, which I thought was interesting. I thought they might have drafted him for that, but he's primarily a corner on the right side. He's essentially their best corner. Now he's pretty short, but you can't really mistake him for that because he's very, very like a very smart player, and he's really fast. He runs like in the 4.3s. In addition to that, like I said, he's been excellent at tackling. The secondary in particular, outside of that Dallas game, they've been really good at tackling. So that's one thing that's kind of really helped their defense this year. Boya, there's a couple clips floating around that how his tackling last week really showed up. But outside of that, CJ Henderson was a guy they traded for. I didn't really care for him too much as a prospect. I thought he was okay. I know a lot of very smart people who study cornerbacks, like Eric Crocker had him as his CB1. And there's a lot of other guys who's former cornerbacks. I feel like I've seen Dominic Foxworth and Will Blackman also be, they're huge fans of Henderson. I just feel like, he's like the kind of the prototypical corner in a sense that he has the length, he has the athleticism. Sometimes, he can run hot and cold. That's what I saw at Florida. His snap count has been relatively light so far here in Carolina. He played, I think, around like 15 snaps against the Eagles. I think it was a similar snap count against the Cowboys too. And, the issue with him in Jacksonville was his durability. And sure enough, he's already in a green jersey, which is designated for the guys who are limited in practice. So he's been limited the past couple weeks. I expect probably a limited snap count again. So, I think just their team building philosophy, especially on defense, prioritizing corners and looking for, value in that sense is pretty smart because you want to have a lot of corners. I know Baltimore took a similar approach a couple of years ago when they traded for like Marcus Peters, and they had a bunch of other guys in that secondary that really helped them. I think they were top 5 in DVOA and EPA per play that season. So I think their team building philosophy, focusing on corners in the back end, is pretty smart. I don't know really what to expect from Gilmore. I mean, he's 31 years old. He kind of had he didn't really have his best season, at least last year. But I mean, it's another body, and JC Horn was playing really, really well as those first 2 to 3 weeks of the season. So obviously, it sucks to see him go. But I mean, Gilmore's arguably, at his peak, he was one of the best like man coverage corners in the NFL.
He's Defensive Player of the Year candidate, if not the actual Defensive Player of the Year, I think. Yeah,
so I mean, it doesn't hurt obviously that there was only a 6th round pick and they had the cap room to absorb his contract. So I'm going to be interested to see how they deploy him. And I mean, Boye, for me, again, I really didn't have much expectations. He also is similar. I mean, not similar in the sense of his stature to Gilmore.
But he had like a peak year, and you were wondering if
exactly.
Yeah.
And he obviously had a couple. He had one down year with after like 2019 and 2020, last year with the Broncos. So, but he's been good in the couple of games that he's played. I don't mind them loading up on corners, but a guy that they've started to implement a lot more is their 5th round pick, Keith Taylor. And I mean, he first came to my radar. I was watching the Senior Bowl. I mean, he has, he's a pretty tall guy, but he doesn't have maybe the 32-inch arm length that, a lot of teams are looking for. But, he's done pretty well these past couple of games. And what they like to do with their corners, especially on the outside, they do a lot of off coverage. And so they're really taught like to play with like that outside leverage in some sense, and then just drive downhill, because if you're playing off coverage, sometimes you think a guy runs like a short stick route or something like that. And so they like to just have their corners play a little off coverage. You don't really see many of them, especially because Jackson is a pretty shorter guy. Taylor's been pretty good. I expect that you'll see Boye. He's going to most likely be like their slot or nickel option this week. That's where he was last week. And I probably would expect Jackson and Keith Taylor to be on the outside.
Okay. And you think that the way that they've attempted to try and find these cornerbacks is to find people that are good in man coverage, but have the capability to pick up some of the zone concepts.
Yeah, absolutely. Again, Henderson was a guy, obviously he was drafted 10th overall, or I think it was 9th overall. But I just think that speaks to like a lot of their philosophy. I mean, JC Horn was, a lot of man coverage. He's extremely physical, really athletic. I mean, that's obviously you're not going to find JC Horns everywhere, but you're going to essentially, they want to look for the length, and they want to look for guys who've played in like those defenses where, there's a lot more man match principles. Like Keith Taylor came from Washington. Mm-hmm. I mean, their defensive coordinator, I think he's now their head coach. It's a pretty similar system to a lot of what you're seeing in college with Aranda and Saban, where they really prioritize just the man match concepts and zone, and also man coverage too, passing off routes. And so, but you're still going to see it at times. They're going to play your traditional zone coverages too, like your cover 3s and your cover 2s at times too. So they like to diversify their coverages quite a bit. They're not going in there with like one fixed, coverage like the peak 2013 Seahawks or something like that. And I know you mentioned that like they're pretty diverse with what schemes they put out there.
Yeah. One thing I wanted to ask about is, and this is kind of funny because when you try to straddle the line between analytics Twitter and film Twitter, you end up with like kind of funny interactions. One thing that people kind of got crazy about in analytics Twitter was Brandon Staley defenses rotating safeties post snap, which is like pretty normal. But like,
oh gosh, yeah.
Staley did it a lot, right?
Yes.
But my wonder is if Carolina is so used to running all these coverages, how often they attempt to use the safeties to kind of disguise the direction their coverage is heading.
Well, I think the thing about their safeties is that those guys are like undrafted free agents. I'm not including Jeremy Chin. I don't really consider him to be like one of their primary
Right.
deep
Yeah.
safeties at this
Yeah.
point.
We're gonna count him in the linebacker unit. We'll talk
Yeah,
about him
yeah,
then.
yeah.
Yeah.
He's in the box, but yeah, no, they try to keep it very simple for those guys, as weird as it sounds, and they do some post snap rotation, like other NFL teams, but for the most part, because those guys are maybe not the best players on their defense, I would argue it's the weakest position on their defense right now,
Mhm.
those safeties, and unfortunately, their reliable veteran guy Justin Burris, he's injured. Don't expect him back this week. I mean, they're going with Sean Chandler and Sam Franklin, and not many people have heard of them.
Yeah.
Um,
I am unfamiliar with actually either of them, and I do like deep dives into undrafted free agents. Like who are these guys?
Yeah, so Franklin actually played at Temple, coincidentally
Oh, of
enough,
course,
recruited
of
by the
course.
staff.
Yeah.
Sean Chandler, I believe they picked him up this year.
Oh, he also played at Temple. It looks
Yeah,
like.
he was also at Temple, undrafted free agent. So
Incredible.
But no, these guys are pretty good tacklers. Like they do pretty good work, especially like, if the ball is in their area or whatever. You're not going to see like Zeke obviously had a ton of huge runs. Same with Tony Pollard in that game. But those guys in the back end kind of cleaned up a few. Sometimes they took poor angles and whatnot. But for the most part, they're pretty reliable tacklers. But you don't see much like post snap rotation with their safeties. And obviously, Brandon Staley had the benefit of having a guy like John Johnson who was able to parlay that into a pretty big free agent deal with the Browns. And the same thing with the Chargers. Adderley is a really good safety in my opinion. So they do some post snap rotation after the snap, but to me it's pretty cut and dry what they ask those guys to do. They really want to make sure that the linebackers and the corners are picking up their assignments and carrying them, so you don't have a situation like you did last week where the hook curl player is supposed to match with Quez Watkins when you have trips that side, and Quez Watkins on the 4-3-5. You don't want him running straight out of post safety and just completely turning him around, and that creates a very easy 53-yard throw. And there's not many easy 53-yard throws in the NFL.
Yeah.
But that's sort of what happened. And so I think the Vikings can certainly like pounce on that. KJ Osborne's a very fast receiver. So if Carolina is not, on their P's and Q's, their front seven and their corners at least, then there's going to be breakdowns in this secondary. And I just want to say, like, there are opportunities for the Vikings to take advantage of this team.
That's
deep.
Interesting. I was about to talk about the linebackers, but this brings up something when I was kind of taking a look at the Carolina defense. I wanted to see if there was a particular play type or a particular route type that was really effective against them. And one that I found was the post route, but I dismissed it because it was a fairly low sample size, especially 5 weeks into the season. You're not going to get a really good understanding of which routes are more effective. But that one popped out to me, and I took a look at the play-by-play, and it was like a couple here or there. There were a lot of Jets plays, and I was like, well, that's kind of weird. I don't know if I want to be doing what the Jets are doing. But it sounds like from what you're saying, that if you create concepts that pair well with the post route, say a Mills concept, or you mentioned trips to one side, so you could probably run a 9-9-9 from there, or I guess it'd be a 9-9-8 or something like that.
Yeah.
It sounds like you'd be able to, especially if you catch them in cover 4. But it sounds like you'd be able to exploit some of these safeties then.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, last week the Eagles ran, I'm not sure what the concept is, but their two outside receivers in the trips, they both ran, dig routes, like maybe intermediate range. And then Quez Watkins was the guy running that deep post route. And so what you had in that situation was both cornerbacks kind of, they bit underneath, which I think they did correctly there. But one of the hook curl players in that case, which it should be Jeremy Chin or their linebacker at the time, Jermaine Carter, should be at least carrying the receiver, and he didn't do that. So the receiver just streaked down the field. And there's been other times too where there's been some breakdowns in their secondary. And, unfortunately, for Carolina's sake, Chandler and Franklin, they're not, athletically gifted either. I think those guys have like a pretty good intrinsic knowledge of the defense and what's required. But they're not exactly the guys who can cover like a lot of rain, like a lot of grass. especially like when you have like a really fast and talented receiver running at you. So yeah, I definitely think there's opportunities for this secondary to be exploited, especially like if you get past the first and second level. But it's down to like the linebackers and just everyone making sure like their man match concepts are on point, because you don't want to have that situation where the safeties in this case are kind of on an island.
Cool. Let's talk about the linebackers, the single digit crew, I guess, right?
Yeah.
You got Shaq Thompson. I bet that cost him some money, the jersey change to 7. But you got Shaq Thompson, Jermaine Carter. Those are the primarily inside linebackers, and you got Jeremy Chin, who's basically a linebacker. I think backups are Julian Stanford, Clay Johnston, and Golden Gopher Kamal Martin. How do you see that unit kind of shaking out? What is their role within? Because I think that the way that you can kind of understand a lot of defenses is asking kind of what the role of a linebacker is. Like with the Vikings, it kind of tells you how the rest of that defense goes. With the Panthers, I feel like you've got something similar there. When you've got a position flexible player like Jeremy Chin, a theoretically position flexible player like Shaq Thompson, you've got a player like Jermaine Carter. Like what do they do within the defense that makes that whole unit go?
Yeah, so Shaq Thompson, unfortunately, is not going to be playing this week. So Jermaine Carter is going to be their primary linebacker. I expect, Kamal Martin, I think, was on the injury report too. And I think they just picked him up. The other linebacker is probably Julian Stanford and Frankie Louvu.
Oh, yeah, Frankie Louvu.
Yeah. He kind of interchanges between like the edge, and sometimes he's kind of like an off-ball linebacker too. So I guess their primary responsibility is, they're doing everything essentially, but they really kind of read the line or the running backs. And one thing that Thompson has gotten really good at this year has been snuffing out screens. So he's not necessarily like, if you see him, one of the linebackers kind of keyed like mugged in the A gap before the snap, they one of their responsibilities usually is to see where the running back goes as well, because like if one of the linebackers comes and blitzes and one of them drops out, you're just kind of just being really patient at the line of scrimmage and seeing kind of where the the back goes. And that's kind of how they were able to limit Kamara. He didn't really have, he had a really bad game, especially rushing, but receiving too. So for them, that's kind of like their main priority, is figuring out where the back is and taking risks, I guess, as far as blitzing and making sure you're staying home to stuff out any possible danger. I will say that they obviously did not have a great day with their run fits against Dallas. It didn't help that the defensive line was getting pushed.
This is a good time to ask about that Dallas game, because it was like, 41, 42, 45 yards rushing, and then 245 yards rushing, and then 91 yards rushing. Like, what the hell happened?
So I think they went into the game. Some of the coaches, they say whatever they want, but I know, the coach, or Matt Rule and Phil Snow, both were very, very complimentary towards Dak Prescott before the game. And they figured out that the best way that, in their eyes, to beat Dallas was to just load up on the light box and allow Dallas to run the ball, essentially, is what they said.
Mm-hmm.
They had their linebackers kind of shaded towards some of their, Dallas likes to have some of their tight ends flexed out. And so they usually had, instead of, adding a linebacker to the box, they made sure like he was outside of, the box and the edge rusher, like past the C gap to kind of where they would usually be in that situation, especially in their coverage concepts. And so Dallas just took it to them.
Did Zeke get hurt in that game? I'm trying to remember.
I don't believe he got hurt.
Oh, okay, never mind.
They 245 yards rushing. Their offensive line, Dallas's offensive line, just completely like took it to them. I think Carolina expected Dallas to throw the ball a little more than they did, because if you remember in week 1, Dallas just completely like ignored the run, which it worked for them. But then the following week, it was a similar type of approach, obviously different concepts that Brandon Staley and the Chargers took, where they allowed Pollard and Zeke to have success, but the game came down to like a 56-yard field goal at the end. So I think their bet was similar to that, in that let's just allow Dallas to run the ball, just make sure that we're very tight in the back end. And it was working essentially for one half. Unfortunately, when you have 2 turnovers and they give them really short fields, you're going to lose games like that. So, yeah, it was mainly just they wanted to stop Prescott in that passing game. I mean, that was like their biggest thing is we don't want to get beat by Dak Prescott, so we're going to try to eliminate the big plays and make him kind of beat us. And they wanted the run game to beat them, and their bet unfortunately did not work. And Zeke and Pollard had remarkable days.
Well, yeah, they averaged 7 yards a carry. I feel like it makes sense.
Contact too was crazy.
I mean, I understand like the famous Bill Belichick game plan against the Bills was to be in a light box to encourage them to run the ball with Thurman Thomas instead of throw the ball with Jim Kelly. And it worked. Obviously, a missed field goal helped, but it kind of worked in slowing down that offense because passing is more efficient than running. But if you're running at a rate that's as efficient as passing the ball, I feel like you're probably doing all right for yourself then.
No, for sure. And I think a few of the players, defensive players, said after the game they just didn't play with the correct technique. And to me, I guess that means that their get-offs and their blocks as soon as they're getting off the line of scrimmage, probably like when they're like a 3 technique, like Derek Brown sometimes play the 3 technique when he's trying to like do a swim move to attack Dak Prescott. Zach Martin and Steele, their right tackle, are just going to completely like gain leverage on him and throw him 5 yards back behind the line of scrimmage. So I don't think they, it was a very tough game for Carolina to begin with. I think Dallas is like, one of the best teams in the NFL, probably the best in the NFC. So they really had like zero margin for error, especially when you're turning ball over twice. So I don't really mind what they did necessarily. I probably would have just liked them to make the adjustments a little sooner, especially in that first half when Zeke and Pollard kind of showed that they were or at least the offensive line was showing that they can create some huge holes.
All right, cool. Before we head on to the offense, just kind of generally, you take a look at that Vikings offense. You see an improved but not necessarily complete Vikings offensive line. You see Kirk Cousins, who's a pretty good but not great quarterback. You see Dalvin Cook, who may or may not be available, but ostensibly a good running back if they matter. You see Adam Thielen, Justin Jefferson, both on the injury report, but Jefferson said he'd be good to go. You see KJ Osborne, who you already talked about a little bit. You take a look at all those players, see all those names. I don't want to forget CJ Ham, fullback. Got to include Captain Ham. What do you think when you match that up against the Carolina defense?
Yeah, I mean, it's going to be a pretty tough challenge for them. I mean, I still think, like, I know Minnesota, new play caller, and they've had a couple maybe lethargic performances the last 2 weeks, but I still think they have...
Maybe, yeah, sure, why not?
Yeah, but I mean, let's just take the first 3 weeks where they played really well. So I think for Carolina, this game is probably going to be similar to what they saw with the Saints. And I think Cousins is obviously much more superior than Jameis, even though I love Jameis as a quarterback, maybe not with the Saints, but I think he's pretty talented. And, the Saints offensive line in that game was just completely overmatched because their center, I don't know how it works with the Vikings as far as who's calling the protections and who's adjusting and sliding and whatnot. But I know for a fact that Eric McCoy was their guy kind of, responsible for that. Nick Underhill was, he does a really great job covering the Saints. He's great. He told me that, McCoy's absence is going to pretty loom large here. So I know maybe Garrett Bradbury doesn't have like the gaudiest stats or whatever, or this is.
But he does call the protections though.
So that's going to be very key, and obviously they have one of the best right tackles in the NFL, O'Neal. And I'm not sure how the situation will unfold with the rotation at left tackle, but regardless of that, I think for Minnesota, if they come prepared and they have their line protections, called correctly and they're sliding the right way, I think they should have a decent amount of success. And Carolina is going to approach it the same way because I'm going to assume that I don't know if Cook is going to play or not, but again, you have an elite running back just like the Saints do, and you have obviously arguably better receivers. I mean, Jefferson and Thielen are really good, and so for Carolina, I think they're going to approach the game similarly to how they did week 2 against the Saints. That was a weird game just because the Saints were missing a bunch of coaches and they've been traveling all over the country. Yeah. And I think we know that the Saints are maybe like an above average team, like similar to, they're probably in the same tier as Carolina and Minnesota. I think we would agree.
Yeah,
But yeah,
sure. Why not? I mean, I would argue that Carolina's defense gives them a trump card in that situation. But yeah, they're all like average to whatever teams.
exactly. I guess like for me, like I'm much more concerned about how Carolina approaches, the naked boot and the wide zones that kind of really have made Kirk Cousins like a pretty good quarterback. The past 3 or 4 years since he's been in Minnesota is, those deep shots to Jefferson, I'm kind of concerned about. And I know you and I talked about it yesterday, but there was that Browns game where, the Browns obviously have a really good defense too, but seeing KJ Osborne just streak right down the field kind of brought me some deja vu as to what Quez Watkins did last week. So it's going to be up to Carolina's linebackers and their secondary to kind of win the game. I trust that they'll do their job up front. I don't expect them to, maybe have their edge rushers go completely like bonkers, especially like rushing on the outside to create those lanes. Cause I know they'd like to do, I've seen them do a lot of draws from shotgun. I don't know how prevalent that is, but I've seen it, especially with Madison. So yeah, I think this is a pretty good offense. I'm obviously worried, and those two pass catchers, whenever you have them on their team, it presents an issue. One thing I will say is the tight ends, maybe, it will. I don't know how much production they're getting from Conklin, and I know that you guys traded for Herndon too.
Oh, yeah, don't worry about Herndon. That's not going to be an issue.
Yeah, so
they grabbed a tight end off waivers the same day, and he's out snapping Herndon.
Oh, lovely! I love when that happens.
He also missed a game, and he's still out snapping Herndon.
The Vikings and making those like preseason trades can.
Yeah, man, that's always a doozy when that happens.
Anyway, but no, I think this offense has obviously the potential to attack this defense in various ways, and I was pretty afraid last week and the week before because Dallas and Philadelphia, they have really good tight ends. I mean, Dallas is obviously good everywhere, but Philly, especially, like the strength of their passing game is the middle of the field with their two tight ends, and if Carolina can at least protect the deep shots that you'll probably see. And I mean, let's be honest, Jefferson's an elite route runner. Like, I don't expect Carolina to necessarily completely shut him down. That's just not going to happen. But if they can just make sure they're tackling correctly, and they've been a really good tackling team, and limit maybe some of the yards after catch, then, I mean, they should kind of be in a good position. And at the same time, they were in a good position last week, and we saw what happened.
Right. Well, yeah, okay, let's talk about the and ... of that sentence. Let's talk about the offense. So I think primarily what I want to ask is, who is Sam Darnold? And has he turned into a pumpkin? Was he always kind of alarming? With these two games kind of unique? That he, I think 5 picks, 2 games, 1 pick, the other 3 games, something like that. What is happening here? Because I think for a bit, and I think that, if you kind of took a look at what he was asked to do, maybe he was a little bit overrated. But for those first 3 games, people are like, wow, the Jets really did, screw up Sam Darnold. He's secretly good. He just had to be with a good offensive coordinator. And then these last 2 games have been kind of whatever. What is going on with Sam Darnold?
Well, I mean, that's a pretty loaded question, but here's...
Take all the time you need, bud.
Sam Darnold is Sam Darnold. I mean, he's the same.
Thanks.
He's the same guy that we saw with the Jets. The difference is, and those first 3 weeks, I mentioned it too, and a lot of people kind of took a little exception, is I saw a lot of elements that I saw with Sean McVay and Jared Goff and Kyle Shanahan and Jimmy Garoppolo, where the quarterback is kind of on training wheels in some sense. He's being asked to make some very conservative decisions with the football. And I mean, it certainly helps when Christian McCaffrey was healthy, because he's just a fantastic like decoy, or not only a decoy option, but just a fantastic outlet for him underneath. So Darnold's issue, and I was sort of impressed with his accuracy the first like 4 or 5 weeks. I thought he threw the ball where he should. Obviously that didn't happen last week, and everything bad about Sam Darnold kind of came to fruition against the Eagles. All the takes that you saw when he was with the Jets, whatever. I think he's a below average NFL quarterback. And I say that with the caveat that you can win games with that, because I think that the offense, the way it's designed, gives him opportunities to throw into some pretty clean windows, and he has obviously good skill players, and I don't expect McCaffrey to play, so that's probably a big break for Minnesota. I didn't practice today, but in general, like he's definitely like a guy who can make all the throws. Like no one disputes that about Darnold. It's just what do you have to support him? And right now, Carolina's offensive line has just turned into a disaster. Partially, I still believe that a lot of the issues come back to how the quarterback is playing too. So a lot of the protection issues comes down to just Darnold like hitching or not throwing the ball when he should, and sometimes he's just not stepping into pockets and just whatever. So he's a below average NFL quarterback. I mean, that's pretty much it. He's kind of being aided in some sense by the Joe Brady scheme and these skill players. And I just think everything bad that we saw with him on the Jets kind of came to fruition last week. I'm confident that won't happen again, because I think that they will. I mean, I hope that they will able to, fix up some of their issues in pass protection. Maybe do some things that kind of help, him stay in the pocket just maybe half a second longer. And the return of McCaffrey, whenever that is, it should be. If it's not this week, it's next week. That will obviously help too. And yeah, I don't know. Like he's still like the below average NFL quarterback always saw. Is he still the worst quarterback in the league? Probably not. But at the same time, like, I mean, you pressure him and you get him to really start feeling it, then he's going to see ghosts and he's going to, drop his eyes and do all the bad stuff that he did with the Jets.
Cool. Let's talk about that offensive line then. Worst in the NFL in pass block grade, worst in the NFL in ESPN pass block win rate. My understanding is that they are not good. What's happening here? So first, is Pat Elflein going to play? Second, would that make you feel any better?
I mean, I'll answer the second question first about Elflein, because I'm sure your fan base is dying to know.
Right. Well, they love the Matt Khalil updates. Now they want the Pat Elflein updates.
I would say, okay, yes, he's going to play. He was practicing this week. Do I think it represents an upgrade? Marginally, which is not saying much, because Dennis Daly, their other guy who was playing, he had a few rough moments, especially against the Cowboys. So it's like a marginal upgrade, if any. So I would still expect that left guard spot to be an issue. Now, what I can say about the other spots, I mean, the right guard position, I mean, just the interior, it's a complete disaster. And maybe you can speak more to Minnesota's interior defensive line, but I don't think that you guys have a defensive, at least your interior is not as good as Philadelphia with Hargrave and Cox.
Not the interior, no.
Yeah, but your edge rushers are obviously really good. Danielle Hunter, I mean, let's go back to 2016 when I think he ended Michael Orr's career. I think that was his last.
Yeah, that sounds about right. Yeah,
I think that was his last game, like in the NFL, because I think he got like a concussion that game, and he had like a safety on Cam Newton. But yeah, no, I mean, in Danielle Hunter, if he's going to be rushing against Cam Irving, it's going to be a problem for Carolina, and that's obviously a huge issue. I mean, Moton has been pretty good. Again, Moton, like Brian O'Neill, one of the best right tackles in the NFL. I have no issues with him whatsoever. Disregarding the fact that they completely just moved him to the left side last week, and he's been a right tackle or he's played on the right side since he was like 14 years old, right guard and right tackle. So I'm glad that experiment ended. I don't want to see that again. I mean, he graded out fine, but I mean, you've seen like a lot of the offensive line gurus on Twitter kind of found it to be a little strange. But no, I expect the right side to be pretty well handled by Moton. He's just reliable, really good pass blocker and run blocker, and a lot of their runs, especially now with Hubbard, have come right behind him. And we'll get into the running backs, I'm sure, but in pass protection, I mean, they're just a complete mess. They can't really pick up basic stunts. I mean, they really struggled with those stunts. And I think it's not even against the Eagles where they had a bunch of new guys. That's been an issue against the Cowboys, Texans, a few times against the Saints too. So for me, it's going to be just how well does Minnesota kind of really affect the interior, and I'm sure they do. Again, that a lot of the double A gap looks that Zimmer loves to show. That's going to be a problem. And McCaffrey, he's really improved as a pass blocker in the limited sample that he's played this year. But Hubbard and Freeman is a pretty good pass blocker in himself, the past few years when he was in Denver, but Hubbard is he's not there yet. So I'm pretty worried about this, how the interior can really affect him. And obviously I think Hunter on Irving is a complete mismatch.
Mm-hmm. That's fair. All right. Well, so we've kind of danced around talking about the running backs for a bit. So yesterday, so we're recording this on a Thursday. On Wednesday, Matt Rule said that Christian McCaffrey is 50-50. Today, my understanding is that Panthers reporters didn't even see him at practice, much less he wasn't, listed. He's listed as a did not participate on the injury report. So it sounds like pretty decent chance that hamstring isn't healthy yet, that he won't play. And you basically just said the same thing. So that brings us, of course, to Freeman and Hubbard. Hubbard has looked good to me, right? Like I like what I've seen out of him as a rookie, but it feels like there's just this sense among Panthers fans that it's not really in the same category of player. Like the reproducibility argument does not hold water about running backs and Christian McCaffrey. How do you think of Chuba Hubbard as somebody who contributes to the offense?
Yeah, he's actually gotten a lot better. Like when I first saw him in the preseason, and he had a couple nice runs and whatever. But just not only just as a runner, just like you have to have like a lot of patience and being able to like allow blocks to develop. And what Carolina is doing again speaks to a lot of the strengths that Joe Brady presents as a play caller, is that they're playing to his strengths, and that's getting him outside the tackles. And I think that's where he's been the most successful. If you block it up well, he has the second level speed to create, hit those holes and really kind of affect the run game that way. But when you're asking him to allow like a duo block to develop and read a Mike linebacker in duo and make sure that he's hitting the right hole, he just does not have that patience like a Christian McCaffrey would. So for him, it's just a lot about the design. They're doing like a lot of wide zone, pin and pulls, some sweeps. They're using him like in all sorts of ways, and they're getting production. Last week at least they got production out of it. So again, I think that the best way, from what I've seen from the Vikings, at least they're Dantzler in particular, he's been pretty decent in run support, and I probably expect the same thing from their. Kendricks is obviously great at filling run fits, and he's just great in general. And from what I've seen from Nick Vigil, he looks to be a solid linebacker too. It's just really about getting on the perimeter on the outside. That's kind of where Hubbard has really made his. He's had a few nice runs like through the tackles, but he's still working like on his patience. He doesn't really necessarily have like the lower body of gravity that McCaffrey has, and just like the patience where you can maybe other running backs can afford to like waste some steps here and there, but with McCaffrey it's just a lot more easier because he has the vision and just the explosiveness. Hubbard is still working on that. He's not really patient right now. He relies on reading something and hitting it as soon as he sees it. So he's probably not going to create a lot of yards after contact too. He has he can't create yards after contact. I shouldn't say that, but he's not going to essentially just if a run is blown up like 1 or 2 yards in the backfield, he's not going to necessarily like break multiple tackles or find another hole or whatever to create his own yardage. Maybe his elusive rating might not be like the best in the NFL.
Might be fast, might be powerful, but he's not necessarily quick.
Yes, yeah, that's a good way to put it. You got to remember, like in the Big 12, like he had some huge holes, so it's a pretty like decent adjustment that he's gonna have to go through.
Running against Phil Snow defenses, right?
Exactly. There you go.
Okay, well, the more interesting conversation is wide receivers. So let's talk about tight end first. Why I drafted Ian Thomas in my dynasty league way back. It just hasn't worked out, man. What's going on with that? B, Tommy Tremble, really?
Hey,
those are my questions.
Yeah, no, I like Tommy Tremble a lot, but let's start with Ian Thomas. It's been one of the more curious cases since he's been with the team. Like the first year he was drafted, I love the pick. I mean, it was the fourth round, the first pick of the fourth round because they traded back. And I mean, I loved it at the time because I thought he was a raw, really athletic guy, and maybe he can kind of develop into a Greg Olsen replacement. But, I just kind of took like his first year, like essentially whatever he produced was cool and maybe use like as a red shirt, whatever. But I've always found it just curious, like why he doesn't see, he gets plenty of snaps. That's the weird thing. He's playing like the majority of snaps, but they're just maybe not targeting him. And from what I see in the film, he is getting open, but maybe like his route distribution isn't the best for a tight end. Like they like to use, like just those normal, like, Shanahan, and I'm sure you guys see it, those flood concepts when you're on a naked play action. They like to just keep him like essentially like in protection and just leak out, which doesn't really help his case. They like to have Tremble maybe come across the formation and or one of the fullbacks and obviously a receiver. So it's just it's interesting that just like the way they kind of utilize him, but he's still getting a decent amount of target, like probably not nearly what he should, but he's still at least seeing targets come to him. But for Carolina right now, their passing game is just, it's built upon the receivers. And Tremble, I really liked them drafting him. I was a huge fan of his during the pre-draft. I mean, he's a really good blocker, I thought, at Notre Dame, and for them to kind of utilize some of his talents as a receiver has been encouraging. Dan Arnold, who they traded in the Henderson trade, he actually was pretty reliable for Darnold. I know that sounds kind of weird, Darnold's Dan Arnold, but no, he was actually really reliable in the sense that he understood like where to. I mean, he's just like a reliable veteran. He knows how to sit in zone coverage, and him and Darnold seem to have a pretty good, relationship at the time. And I just don't see it in these situations now. Darnold, when he scrambles or when he's coming off a second or third read, him, Ian Thomas and Tremble probably don't have that connection. So it's a lot of defined reads that you will see to Thomas and Tremble. Whereas with Arnold, who they had previously, they kind of had a good combination of where to find each other if things kind of broke down.
All right. That brings us to the receiver group. So you've got DJ Moore, who our mutual friend Scott never liked, but has turned into a pretty remarkable.
You actually texted me about him the other day.
I bet. Robbie Anderson, Sun God, who Sam Darnold doesn't like throwing to, I guess. Guess. It sounds like you got something to say on that. You've got Terrace Marshall, who is Fusu View's favorite receiver. Then you've got former Vikings receiver Brandon Zylstra, brother of former Vikings tight end Shane Zylstra. I think a Wisconsin guy in Alex Harrison, and a return guy in Shi Smith. So this is a pretty good receiver group. I wouldn't put it up next to Jefferson and Thielen, but I would say that they've got a shout. It's probably one of the better receiver duos in the league. Plus, you've got Terrace Marshall in there as well. How is this receiver group developed? Why isn't Sam Darnold throwing to Robbie Anderson? God damn it! And what do you expect out of this group against Patrick Peterson, Bashad Breeland?
Yeah, so I would say, maybe this is DJ Moore has obviously turned in to be one of the better receivers in the NFL. Arguably, I don't know, however you want to rank them, top 10, top 15. He's really good, obviously. Right. His route running has improved immensely. I think it's not necessarily the top of routes that you're gonna, maybe like a Jefferson or like a Keenan Allen. Those guys really like have excellent footwork at the top of routes to create like distance between them and the defender, whereas Moore, his releases have really improved. Not only is he using his hands, but his footwork at the line of scrimmage has allowed him to create some separation, and he has the speed to really stack defenders if he's running like a vertical route. But yeah, I mean, outside of that, I mean, he's their primary guy. I mean, he's going to see like the lion's share of targets. So I'll be interested to see how Minnesota, guards him and what kind of coverages they throw his way, because I think the Eagles did a pretty good job of, especially late in the game, taking him away. They did some interesting, not necessarily bracket him, but they just kind of shaded coverage towards his direction, and that left Robbie Anderson opportunities. And I don't know why Darnold is not throwing it to him. I really don't.
They have like a beef from their time with the Jets. Like, what's?
I
going
don't
on?
know. I don't know. And I don't know what. So Robbie spoke yesterday at a press conference. He
Oh,
obviously
hell yeah.
felt
What did he say?
he kind of a lot of the reporters asked him what was up with your outburst at the end of the game, and he just felt like, obviously I was upset that we weren't running some double moves, and he wasn't seeing the ball necessarily as much as he wanted to, and then he kind of just said that I don't see anyone. He essentially defended himself, saying, I don't see anything wrong with it. I see Tom Brady always yelling on the sideline, blah blah blah.
Oh,
You know how it is.
buddy. Oh, pal. That's not. Oh, love you, Robbie.
So I think his issue last week, and this is just going to some reporting, is that they weren't running a lot of double moves. And to an extent, he's right, because Philadelphia coming into the game, they were like a team that liked to play a lot of two high shells, a lot of cover two. And I don't know, like, I don't necessarily, I don't know, maybe you know more than I do. I'm not sure double moves are like the greatest route against a two high secondary where, one of the corners in the flat and you have a guy, on the outside who can match. But what Philadelphia did is they played a lot more cover three last week. And I don't think Carolina was necessarily prepared for that. So they didn't really kind of, adjust some of their play calling in that situation. So and he has obviously a right to be frustrated. But I would go back to the Dallas game when he was open on a double move. He was open streaking down the field on one of Darnold's interceptions. And even last week, there was a cover two beater that they ran when Philly was actually in cover two. It was a two deep curls in front of the safeties. And Darnold, he just decided to check down to one of the running backs. So he has to obviously get involved. I mean, they signed to an extension, so he's a pretty big part of their immediate future. And I mean, he's still a really good receiver, in my opinion. I mean, he runs good routes. Like I see it. Like he's maybe not like,
My eyes are telling me.
Yeah, no, maybe he's not like the best like route runner, but he's getting open. And I mean, when you have a guy who's very fast like him, and he understands like the nuances of route running and where to position yourself and how to gain leverage, then yeah, you should target that guy. But I just feel like Darnold's vision is kind of limiting in that sense because he's just looking at maybe DJ Moore. And again, DJ Moore, you should give him a lot of targets too. But like Philly did last week, they were able to kind of take him away in some aspects. And I think a lot more teams are going to do that now when, Darnold or Robbie Anderson isn't seeing the targets. The same thing with Terrace Marshall. He had on Trevon Diggs' interception, the first one, he was running down the field open on a post, but Darnold tried to throw it to Anderson, coincidentally enough, and Diggs just sat there. So it's the same kind of situation with Marshall and Anderson in that they're not really seeing the targets, but they are getting open. So there's just been like a lack of vision from the quarterback to see those guys. And obviously when we're discussing a pass blocking unit that's not very good, that could obviously limit some factors as well. But they do like to run a lot of 11 personnel with those three, Anderson, Marshall, and Moore. They do have packages in 21 personnel where they have Brandon Zystra. I think he used to play for the Vikings too, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, he did.
He's kind of like a guy they like to play like in 21 personnel. He's a pretty good blocker, but they have him running. He caught a touchdown against the Saints on one of those naked boot concepts. And so he was probably, I would say, like their fourth receiver, and Erickson their fifth, and he's a special teams return guy. Shai Smith, I don't think has been activated. He got injured in the preseason, unfortunately. But yeah, no, it's honestly, it's down to Darnold. Like I'm seeing it. Anderson and Marshall, they're getting open. I just think that the QB's processing, especially, has been a pretty big issue this year.
That's fair. So you take a look at the Vikings defense. It's improved over the past couple of games. You see that the pressure rate, especially from rushing four, is fairly high. You know that the offensive line is an issue, but you also know, that receiver group is pretty fair. You don't know if Darnold's going to see that receiver group or not. How do you anticipate that matchup between the Panthers offense and the Vikings defense?
Well, I think Donnell Hunter and Everson Griffin should have pretty big games. I think Carolina, they're going to try to, I know this sounds cliche, but they're going to really want to try to establish the run. And I don't know how well they're going to be able to do it with Chuba Hubbard, and how maybe, Hubbard isn't necessarily the most, you're not going to, I mean, you're going to essentially, what his strengths are, and his strengths are running outside. So for me, I think Minnesota should have a pretty decent advantage in this part of the field because, as maybe poorly as Breeland has played, I think Carolina's going to obviously attack him, but it's going to come down to protection. And, for Carolina's protection, can they hold up against two guys who are, at the top of, I was just looking at Brandon Thorne. He tweeted out earlier, like his pressure percentage thing that has going on. Hunter and Griffin were both like in the top 5.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm obviously very worried about what's going to happen up front because, like you said yesterday, I expect Sam Darnold to be very sore. I think there are weak spots in this defense, like if they can attack Breeland. But the question is, will the protection hold up? And I'm not very confident right now that it will. So it's going to be like a lot of like play action, especially like if the game script calls for it. If you're down 2 or 3 possessions, maybe you're not running play action. But I think that's really how they're going to win this game, is just making sure like that they're not necessarily trailing. Because if they're trailing, I don't see them winning this game. I really don't, because they cannot play from behind, especially with this offense and how poor they are in protection and how this quarterback can really run into issues. So for Carolina, it's just going to be about like the opening script drive, really taking advantage of that, doing a lot of like I said, running the ball with Hubbard and creating these opportunities in the play action game. Because if you ask Arnold to get back into a drop back passing game, it's not going to go well.
Oh, fair enough. Let's talk about the final thing that everyone loves about the Panthers, the kicking game. Is PJ Walker a better kicker than Zane Gonzalez?
Actually, Zane Gonzalez made all of his kicks last week.
Yeah, okay. How confident are you that is a repeatable behavior?
Not confident at all, but I mean, we are playing the Minnesota Vikings.
Okay, yeah, no, that's fine. But like, let's remove that from the. It's annoying that you know that. Let's remove that from the calculation for a second, and bring up the fact that Zane Gonzalez, I believe, has the lowest true field goal accuracy rate or something like that. What is it? Second lowest, next to Eldrick Rosas. I mean, he sucks, right?
He's not good. I mean, let's just be honest. I mean, there's not many good kickers in the NFL.
Okay, that's fair.
So, but no, he's not good. I think the issue, Carolina's special teams is not good this year. I mean, their punter, he's hurt now, and I think he got hurt because the Eagles blocked a punt late in the game. The Carolina has allowed actually multiple blocked field goals, if I'm not mistaken.
Right, Gonzalez is the emergency punter, and PJ Walker is the emergency kicker, right? Like that's why that even came up, is because the punter got hurt.
Yeah, the last week, but I think they pulled up.
Was that okay? That like brought up a question about was that a penalty, or did they like put a fingernail on the ball? What happened there?
Well, no, I just think that they came through, and I guess he landed the wrong way in that situation. I don't. I have to watch it again. But I think I'm like 90% sure that's how he got injured. It wasn't a penalty. It was a pretty clean block. But no, yeah, I mean, he's not a good kicker. He doesn't really have a strong leg. You're going to notice, we'll see what happens with the weather and whatnot, but I haven't seen many touchbacks from him either. I mean, I think last week he did have a couple, and that's probably just because the Eagles were told to, fair catch or whatever, like as soon as they got to like the goal line. But like any other good returner, like if it's like 1 or 2 yards deep in the end zone, is usually returning it. So he doesn't have a strong leg. And the reason, according to the coaches, that they picked him up was because of his accuracy. But his accuracy has also been bad. So right now what you have is you have a protection unit with field goals and punts. That's not very good. You have a kicker who runs hot and cold. He ran hot last week. Let's see. I'm not holding my breath that it's going to repeat. And now you have your backup punter in. You just picked up a punter this week. So their special teams unit right now is, I would say, a mess.
Okay, cool. Zane Gonzalez, one of the best college kickers in the history of college football, is bad at kicking. I don't know. That's amazing to me.
I thought Aguayo would be up there.
Aguayo did not kick that many kicks from more than 40 yards, which should have been a clue to the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Just putting that out there, my dudes. Yeah, so that's cool. Not much else to add there, unless there's like some other fourth thing that I forgot. Is there anything that you wanted to add, or do you just want to go straight to plugging your socials and all that?
I mean, hey, we saw what happened last year. It was a pretty crazy game. Even the game in 2017 was, again, pretty insane. So I expect a pretty weird game on Sunday. I don't know what's going to happen. I don't know. Carolina, they're at home. This is a game that they maybe should win, but Minnesota is also kind of against the ropes too. So I just expect something weird to happen on Sunday.
You have a score prediction?
Someone's going to win 20-17. I don't know who.
That's fair. I think I picked 13-10. I don't like these offensive lines. I was just like, everyone's going to get beat up. Don't worry about it. All right. Well, thanks so much. So this is Billy Marshall. You can find him at the Roar Podcast. Billy, your Twitter handle is like something like Billy _M91, something like that.
Billy M_91.
That's it. Billy M_91. That's too many non-standard characters. I don't like it.
Oh,
I mean, that's my opinion on your Twitter handle. Take it or leave it.
Well,
follow me on Twitter.
I can't, unfortunately. Everyone has, their name NFL, and their Twitter handle. So I tried to be a little more personal.
No, it's good to be different. But like, Lauren Cox's Twitter handle is Cox Sports One. I mean, it's different. It's unique.
Oh, I like that.
It's fantastic, right? Okay, I'm glad because he only has held on to it because I keep telling him how much I like it. I think other people should tell him because it is great. But no, follow Billy. He doesn't just tweet about Panther stuff. He does a bunch of draft stuff. He's also super creepy when it comes to like prospect visits and stuff like that. He knows what coaches are at, what prospect pro days and stuff like that. He's really good during the draft season to follow. I hope you don't mind that description of you.
No, it's fine. It's fine. I just follow a bunch of them during the draft on Instagram, and then I unfollow them.
Well, I hope you unfollow them. It'd be too many people to follow. Jesus.
Oh, no. I unfollow them immediately after. I have no business following them.
Awesome. And thanks so much for coming on, man.
Yeah, man. Thanks for having me.
All right, let's go to the mailbag, and let's stop off with Raul first, who asks, a lot has been said about 2nd and 10, but what about 1st and 10? How have we fared on that down? I bet not great because we talk about 2nd and 10 so much. Are we...
Sorry.
That's fair.
That's really good.
That's
good.
That's sharp. Are we more successful running or throwing on 1st and 10? And do we ever employ play action on that down?
The Vikings definitely do employ play action on that down. I'm going to really quickly look up the Vikings on 1st and 10 just by their EPA. Luckily, I can just do this like crazy quickly because of the NFL Faster tool that exists now, which we didn't used to have. But by expected points added per play, you wouldn't be surprised to realize that this year Kansas City is number 1, LA is number 2, Tampa Bay is number 3. The Minnesota Vikings are 18 on 1st and 10. So their success rate is 41%, which is 28th. And so when they are successful, they tend to be a little bit more explosive than the typical successful team on 1st and 10, but they just aren't successful enough. So they are wasting their 1st and 10. I suspect it is because they run the ball. But they do play action on 1st and 10. I even have a little statistic thing set up for how often the Vikings do play action on 1st and 10. But, long story short, they're doing it a lot less this year. We've talked about it a lot. It's something that they should do more of, and it's something I expected in the Lions game, which we did see a little bit of. We should, I think, see it in this Carolina game if what Billy was telling us about the back end of that secondary being kind of porous is true.
All right, let's go to the next question, which comes from Roshi Star Pupil, who asks, has Zimmer been tested since Kirk Cousins got into his personal space?
I'm sure he has. So the media has like a weekly cadence where we have to get tested. We have to get tested once a week and on Wednesdays. And so I imagine that Zimmer's, well gone through it for sure, even though there was a critical lack of plexiglass there.
Yeah. Definitely a lack of plexiglass. Arif's neglected resistance bands asks, I still can't hear any of Arif's responses to my comments in the show. Are they Patreon exclusive? Kenneth Allen asks, is Sam Darnold good? I've watched all these games, and sometimes he looks good, and sometimes he looks awful. Isn't the post-Gase bump supposed to solve this issue?
No one said that the post-Gase bump was permanent. I think that's the problem here, right? Because Ryan Tannehill, for example, right now, is not killing it like he was in previous years. He's not bad, right? But he's not killing it like he was in previous years. That post-Gase bump, might only be temporary, although evidently sometimes it could be good enough to win you some playoff games. So I think actually, you know how like teams in soccer will loan out players to other clubs. Usually, like a Premier League team will loan out a player to like a championship team so that they get experience, and they agree on who pays what portion to what salary and stuff like that. The Vikings should loan out Kirk Cousins to Adam Gase. I don't think Adam Gase is with the team right now, but just to Adam Gase.
To help mow his lawn and
see if he has any tubes that need to be filled with death rocks.
Clean the pool,
just normal human activities that humans do. For a couple of weeks. In the meantime, Kellen Mond gets critical experience. Cousins comes back, and you've got a Super Bowl run, I think. But no, we answered the question about whether Sam Darnold was good in the interview, and the interview was taped earlier. So if I remember correctly, the answer was, probably not.
We'll hope for the best at this point. Also from Kenneth Allen, it seems to me and many others that the Vikings are bad at stopping the run. How would you create a statistic to measure run stop effectiveness per dollar spent on run stopping linemen? Is there any other team paying as much to stop the run and being as ineffective in doing so?
Whether there's a team that's like more ineffective at stopping the run and paying as much, I don't think so. Because if you take a look at like rush defense EPA, which is probably the best way to take a look at this, the Vikings are 28th in the league. So in order for someone to be more inefficient at spending on defensive linemen that are geared towards stopping the run, you would need to convince me that the four teams below the Vikings are paying more for their interior defensive linemen, which they could be, but I don't believe they are. So that'd be Jacksonville, Tennessee, the Los Angeles Chargers, and Kansas City. I don't believe that's the case. But were I to construct a statistic, I would probably just use PFF run stopping grade and subtract their average approximate value from the minimum value that you have, because you always have to roster 53 and then pay the minimum or something like that. That would be the first way to do it. But if the question seems to be about spending money at the expense of giving up pass rushing capability in order to stop the run, in which case that one's harder. You'd have to probably use a projected run stop rate based off, or projected PFF run grade based off of their career history at stopping the run, and then also add in some sort of modifier that provides additional, essentially, points for that the further away they are from being good at pass rushing based off of the same metric. And so you get a uniqueness metric for how clearly this person is designed to be on the team to stop the run. And then that gets measured against the salary again. So that's probably how you would do it. There's no way I'm doing that to answer a mailbag question on the podcast.
Not even just a little bit. Aww.
No, I thought of it we got this question a bit ago. I saw the question. I was like, I wonder how I'd answer that. And I didn't think about it until we recorded. That's how much that went into that.
Oh, fair enough. Bishop Sycamore alumnus asks, do we know if the John Gruden firing qualified for the first firing payout? Any chance that played into the calculus of the timing of the release? Unlikely he's going to start better than 3-1.
So I think that, obviously it depends on the book, right? But I think that most books would honor a forced resignation as a firing for a firing payout. My guess is that John Gruden had so few bets placed on it that it actually would benefit them from a monetary perspective to honor that bet, because then they wouldn't have to pay out any, because if they don't honor that, then the first coach that does get fired, they would have to honor. And I bet they have more to pay out and less to take in those situations. This is definitely not the case where like somebody put like an insane amount of money on Leicester to win the Premiership or something. And like, you know, casinos were like, crap, now we got to pay it. I think that the odds on John Gruden were not even appealing enough. Like they were low or I should say long and not appealing enough that I think very few people bet on it. So if they pay out those bets, now they don't have to pay out the bets on like, you know, Mike Zimmer or I don't know who else is on the hot seat. Pete Carroll. I don't know.
Pete Carroll shouldn't probably be on, but you'd have to expect that his time in Seattle is starting to come to an end.
Yeah, he shouldn't be on the hot seat this year. I guess that was maybe a bad guess, but I just didn't think of.
If he is on the hot seat, he's putting himself there. He's leaving that way. Although it'd be curious to see.
Urban Meyer, duh, Jesus, why did I think
Urban Meyer
Yeah.
is the one we were thinking about. Yeah,
yeah, and so then you wouldn't have to pay out there. But yeah, can you imagine Vegas getting to keep all the money that flowed in on the Urban Meyer bets? Oh,
conversely,
yeah, absolutely, they honor the John Gruden payout.
Conversely, I wonder if there was any money that moved with the release of the information from the NFL on the Friday with the email, and seeing if like. Just throwing that out. I'm curious if any late money came in on that. That would be.
That's one where like because Vegas is always weird about props and stuff, and the prop odds are always bad anyway. That as soon as that happened, I bet all of the bookies closed.
Yeah,
like, I mean they just closed the props on that. Yeah,
we're not messing with that. And let's go in a little bit further. Luke Braun asks, what cancel-worthy secrets about Kirk Cousins are buried in Bruce Allen's email history? Now, if you're looking for a connection to the Vikings on this whole story,
there it is.
Yeah, here it is, because you have to imagine a myriad of emails about RG3 and Kirk Cousins in this whole mess that are apparently never going to see the light of day.
Well, I mean, at this rate, it feels like anytime there's a nationally televised game, there's going to be a new story. So who knows? Some new emails could come out, you know, on Sunday and then on Monday. Like it just seems like the NFL is not leaking them, but someone in the NFL is.
Yeah, I'm not. I'm just not certain, because the emails that got out involved making fun of the commissioner. And nothing else has come out since. So. Oh
yeah, well, I mean, a new one just released today. You might have missed this.
I must have missed this when I wasn't watching the game or Twitter tonight. So.
Yeah. So the NFL's former general counsel Jeff Pash, their like attorney. So a bunch of emails just got released, or a bunch of stories about the emails got released today with Jeff Pash, who was very friendly with Bruce Allen. In a way that like clearly violated his responsibilities as the NFL's lead counsel, so that when the NFL would be investigating stuff like the Washington football team doing anything, but particularly sexual harassment in the workplace and the treatment of the cheerleaders, Pash would then respond with, well, Bruce, we're good friends. I know you wouldn't do this, which is like you're in charge of the investigate. Like, yeah, it's awful. It's not as explosive, I think, as the John Gruden stuff, and honestly, it's very bad for a lot of reasons. But it's probably not nearly as bad. But it's new stuff is happening, man. every nationally televised game, we're going to get a new round of emails.
And is it Schefter breaking it every time? Because apparently that's become
that's
fun question.
Yep. That one actually has nothing to do with the NFL leak. It's the same group of emails, but it was for a lawsuit that Dan Snyder filed against Bruce Allen for defamation in, I think, Indian media, like the country of India. It's so bizarre. But during the discovery process of this lawsuit, a bunch of these same emails were surfaced, redacted, but poorly redacted, I guess in a Los Angeles court. I don't know. But the LA Times published that story based off of those emails, not off of leaks they got from the NFL, but from emails that Dan Snyder himself forced to come to light through the discovery process of his own litigiousness towards the person that he hired, saying true stuff about him, but in kind of a mean way. And that's where the Schefter thing comes from. So everything is happening, man. all at once. And we're not even the Washington football team is being investigated by the DEA. We haven't even talked about oh my God, there's so much.
It just keeps going, and let's just be happy for the DEA for a moment. Not only did they get to have their DEA day over at the Nationals ballpark, literally a thing that existed a few days ago.
That's right. They had a snitches day.
They had a DEA day over at the Nationals baseball park. Later,
hey kids, do you like narking?
Later, they were able to go across town to Landover and go over to the Washington football team's offices and raid their doctor. So
the trainer and now the assistant trainer, and no one's talking about it because this is totally unrelated to the email stuff. This was happening whether or not the emails were.
How convenient was that? The fact that the DEA, which happens to be located in Washington, D.C., just has to go over to Landover, Maryland, not that far away, and was able to come home for dinner.
DEA Day. I cannot believe that.
Just amazing. To answer Luke Braun's question, somebody on Twitter had mentioned something. What was it again, Arif?
Oh, yeah. That the what Kirk Cousins would be canceled for, or the awful secret hidden about Kirk Cousins in the emails, or that he got the flu vaccine. That was a great response. I forget who said it. I can't beat that one. That one rules.
Well, let's pile on the Washington football team a little bit further here. Anton asks, to build off of James's tweet earlier, what is the Vikings' next in line in case of emergency break glass PR move, and what will be the cause? So I had tweeted out earlier because the Sean Taylor number retirement ceremony was announced this morning. It's Thursday. It was announced this morning as a hey, it's the week of the game week, whatever. We're going to announce it that we're going to do this. Meanwhile, all of this storm has been brewing for the Washington football team, and absolutely no one was thinking that this was going to be, a thing. Apparently, they've been planning this for weeks and decided to announce it during the week of the game. And which you can believe either stupidity or ineptitude or whatever, or you can believe that this is one giant distraction. But there are players who said that they've been contacted like weeks ago that they were doing this. So
Ryan Clark specifically tweeted out that he was invited to an alumni event about Sean Taylor. Didn't know it necessarily would be a jersey retirement, but he knew that there would be an alumni event a couple of weeks ago. Honestly, that's the only piece of evidence there that I can trust, because I don't really think Ryan Clark has reason to lie.
Yeah, this is you can officially believe that they are not just terrible people, but just incredibly incompetent.
Right. Yeah, and this is like a crazy amount of incompetence, because even if Washington wasn't in the middle of literally multiple separate, individuated, uncorrelated scandals, which, goodness. And also, how is Dan Snyder still he's not running the team technically because of the investigation. He can't run the day-to-day operations, but he still makes money off the team. That. Oh, anyway. Yeah. Just get him out. Okay, doesn't matter. Roger Goodell works for him and 30 other people. Packers don't count. Well, they don't have an owner, right? So they have a president that no one votes for, but they all vote for. So that means that they decided to retire Sean Taylor's number and contacted his family and contacted a production company to produce these towels that would have his number on it, and coordinated the logistics of the players for the alumni day, and all of the other events that you would need to do this properly, and then never let season ticket holders know that this was happening, never let fans know that this was happening, and just announced it 3 days before the game without realizing that fans might want to take the time to be there. And also, it's very weird that they only produced 10,000 towels for the first 10,000 fans to be there. Wouldn't everyone there want the towel? And so then they decided to sell the towels, and then all the proceeds from the towels so anybody can have them, which is cool, but it's just so weird that all. And so 3 days before the game, that's when he's one of the most iconic players in the history of the franchise, and certainly one of the most, if not the most beloved player in the history of the franchise. And you managed to announce the Bobby Mitchell jersey retiring several months before it happened. Like that's why people are suspicious. Well, there's a ton of reasons people are suspicious and you're not trustworthy, but that's why, like, it doesn't add up. Like my brain is short circuiting over how, like, covering the Vikings is like a roller coaster, and I will never forget that. But covering Washington just seems like a bat to the face every other week. Like, that's not the same. Like, covering the Vikings is funny. Like, it is an insane, stupid team to cover, but for like football reasons usually, or like Adrian Peterson reasons, or Chris Cleary reasons, but usually football reasons. And it's like a lot, and it's more than it is probably to cover a lot of other teams, but covering Washington just has to feel like you're constantly operating without blood. Like, that's nuts to me.
It's also why the drive time radio people for DC are just brutal. Like they've long been associated with just being absolutely brutal. They are ranked right up there with Philly as far
I don't understand the Philly thing. Like
Philly, they just have a bad attitude, and
but like why? What material reason makes Philly worse than? Because we all agree that it is, right?
Well,
like when
yes,
Philly fans aren't
Philadelphia's trash, but the point is.
But like, see, when Philadelphia fans aren't complaining about the perception that their fan base has, they are reveling in it, right? Like after they won the Super Bowl, a bunch of people were calling them assholes, and they were like, "Goddamn right, we're assholes." And it's like, well, fine, if you're owning it, you're owning it. But like, then why are you complaining when we talk about the time you threw batteries at Santa? And you're like, well, you don't get it. Santa deserved it. And based off of the story I heard, maybe he did. That's kind of weird.
Yeah, but what about the punching of horses?
Right,
Ben Natan doesn't own that.
Right, it's a horse. Like,
of course.
You have a jail cell in the state anyway. So, but like, why though? Like, I understand like the Washington football team being warped by how much of an ethical black hole. I mean, they're all ethical black holes. I'm not going to pretend this sport is ethical, but they're all ethical. But like, how much of an ethical black hole Washington specifically, the last team to integrate because it was forced to integrate because of the racist pro-segregation owner, and then somehow it continued. Like that, I get that, right? I get how that screws you up, and then also it's in DC, like the worst place for your brain to rot. If you're not like from there, but like if you have to be there for politics, yeah. But like, I get that. I get how that warps the sports environment. But like, what is it about Philly? Why not New York?
Well, because they're not New York, probably. But
okay, actually the relationship to New York probably plays a role, yeah.
Yeah, but let's look at this, because I had tweeted out earlier that when I first had read the news about this decision that they were going to have the retirement ceremony, or the number retirement ceremony rather, my only thought was just that, I'm convinced that every NFL team has like a short list somewhere of like, in case of emergency, break glass PR moves. And no one's really debating that whether or not it should or shouldn't happen, but it still seems like one hell of a distraction. So the question is, what do the Vikings have in the way of like break glass PR moves that they could just do?
Yeah, and this one's easy. This one is so easy, especially because we were already on track with the jersey retirement. Randy Moss.
Yeah, it would have to be Randy Moss's. And you announced that even 2 weeks before it happens, and the resale value of those tickets is obscene.
Yeah, that's they'll be like NFT prices, right?
Yeah,
like
no, and on the plus side, no one will be able to just screenshot those.
You could do something with it. That's wild.
Yeah, it'd be that. Jared Allen eventually when he goes into the Hall of Fame.
That feels like it's second. I love Jared Allen, but that feels like it's second tier to Moss.
It is. It is absolutely. This is assuming they've already broken the glass on Moss. So
and then like. Wait, like down as you keep going, if you run out of ways to distract the fans, which man are you in a spot, you could do stuff like, hey, we're unveiling a Purple People Eaters defensive line statue. They'll be there at the statue unveiling. It's in front. Like there's a lot of ways you could do it.
Yeah, Minneapolis Miracle statue. I still feel like is
bring Diggs back for that and just say, no hard feelings. Here's the statue.
First Bills game back to the stadium. Just we unveil this. That'd be kind of cool.
Perfect.
So
yeah.
there's plenty of interesting ideas, but yeah, those seem like the ones that would end up happening like sooner rather than later. Let's go to Nolan Kaler's question, which is a question for Arif's movie corner. Which Nic Cage is Kirk most similar to? My vote is for Moonstruck for the similar emotional outbursts that just leave everyone feeling awkward. So for those that have missed this news, this originally stemmed from the Kirk Cousins mic'd up video that was released this week from the Lions game, where another player, I think it was Conklin.
Yeah, Tyler Conklin.
Yep, had come by and had mentioned a Nic Cage movie. And so at the presser, they proceeded to ask for more information about it. And Kirk was the most likable he's ever been as a Viking.
It was like so personable and human, and like. We were doing the media was doing the back and forth. We're like, hey, what about Con Air? Or hey, is Die Hard a Christmas movie? Like a normal conversation that humans would have, which like is normally not a thing that you would say, hey, I can't believe this happened, but like, I can't believe this happened. But yeah, so he listed off a couple of Nic Cage movies. He's got a whole list. What did they say? 22 movies. Of course, he knows the number that he needs Tyler Conklin to watch.
I loved that he was talking about it like he was talking about like receivers doing like route homework.
Okay, so when I was a debate camp counselor, I actually did this to the students, where I was like, okay, here's a list of movies you all need to have seen. I won't talk to you or coach you until you've seen at least one. I was not a good coach until you've seen at least one of these movies or have made efforts to see one of these movies, and I need proof. And then after enough time, you'll need to have seen another one of these movies. It was like stuff that's like cultural touchstone stuff, right? Like Indiana Jones, Star Wars. Like, you haven't seen these? That's kind of weird, sort of stuff.
Be like you're a high school student who hasn't seen Monty Python's Holy Grail. Come back.
Yeah, exactly. That was on the list.
In a few hours. Yeah.
Yeah. But yeah, it was like that, except Tyler Conklin's like 24. Like that's the. But yeah, so he listed a number of movies: Guarding Tess, which I have not seen, National Treasure, obviously, Con Air, Gone in 60 Seconds. He mentioned Harrison Ford movies like Clear and Present Danger and Patriot Games. We'll talk about that in a bit, but the question is, which Nic Cage is Kirk Cousins? And I went through a couple of Nic Cage movies, and so the answer that we want it to be, that it would rule if it were the case, is Johnny Blaze and Ghost Rider. There's no question that that's the best quarterback. You want your quarterback to be Johnny Blaze. There's no question about that. And sometimes Kirk Cousins, like at the end of the last Carolina game that they played, to bring it back to something topical, I shouldn't even pretend. The Denver comeback, the 30-second comeback against the Lions we just saw, he can be pulled to hell. He can invoke Johnny Blaze, but most of the time it's not that, right? So that would be awesome. And then I got to thinking, like, hey, there's a lot of Nic Cage movies. There's a bunch of quarterbacks that this could be. So I was thinking, Kirk Cousins is definitely not Raising Arizona. That might be Johnny Manziel. And then the improved version of the guy from Raising Arizona is the guy in Con Air, and that's Baker Mayfield, right? So that like works for me, right? And then I was thinking, oh man, who would Aaron Rodgers be? And I realized, and this movie is like a lot, so if you're not prepared for like some really heavy stuff, don't watch it. But 8mm, mostly because in that movie, he is like obsessed to the point of cutting off his ties with other people that he knows, to finding out whether or not this thing he's seeing is authentic or not. And it gets to the point where he just goes through so much, he breaks down. And at the very end, before determining whether or not the truth of what he thinks is true, spoiler alert for 8mm, he just burns all the evidence and walks away. And that seems very like that's Aaron Rodgers, right? Lord of War. This is a war criminal who is also an arms dealer, or that is why he's a war criminal. So he's an arms dealer. He's very comfortable with that fact, but he's not. That's the point of the movie. And I feel like that's Tom Brady. Like that makes sense to me. Like he's probably making a bunch of ethical compromises, which when you joke about it on Twitter, a bunch of Patriots and Bucs fans get mad at you and enter my mentions. You whoop-de-doo. So there's a lot of good ones in here. I think that when we're mad at Kirk Cousins, he's the main character from Adaptation, the screenwriter that tries and fails to adapt The Orchid Thief by Susan Orlean. So that's that one. But sometimes, in some situations, very occasionally, he's Johnny Blaze.
And some occasions, he's also the guy in Wicker Man with the bees stuck on his head.
The bees. I feel like Kirk Cousins imagines himself as noir Spider-Man from Into the Spider-Verse.
Yeah, maybe. Let's go to Damian Barrett, who asks, can Arif rank all of Kirk's god-awful 90s movies from worst to best? There's only a couple of worst in here.
We are talking about Nic Cage movies, and in the range of Nic Cage movies, none of these fit god-awful. Like, maybe against other movies they could, and I don't know. I've seen some god-awful movies.
Face Off is pretty atrocious.
Well, yeah, but that wasn't on the list.
That was
right?
not on the list. No, that was probably not a movie that was seen at one of his lock-ins.
Right. That makes sense. But yeah, which is my point, right? That if you rank Nic Cage movies, the movies that Kirk Cousins mentioned are not in the awful category because there's so many awful category movies there. So I'll say that. And then these movies are like, the bad ones are like fun bad. National Treasure is a good example. That's like not a good movie. Kirk Cousins seemed to I'm concerned a little bit because it seems like Kirk Cousins like genuinely likes National Treasure, and I can only ever understand that movie in terms of ironically liking it because it's insane, right? And its sequel, which is the same movie, but instead of the Declaration of Independence, it's John Wilkes Booth's diary, the guy who shot Lincoln. Hold on, I'm sorry. That's so dumb. and they find more clues on the wooden planks of the desk that's made out of the Resolute in the Oval Office.
Spoiler alert for the second movie.
Spoiler alert for National Treasure 2.
We were talking before the show. I'll let Arif compose himself here.
It's so dumb.
We were talking pre-show about this, and I like to think that Kirk Cousins, since he didn't mention National Treasure 2 and 3, actually has opinions on them and being like, oh, these are too derivative. I thought
yeah, right. He's
really
like giving like his opinion. He's like, I understand building on the scaffolding and even the structure of the original National Treasure. That's a classic, and obviously you're harkening back to you've got the same character, and you want to see them in the same wacky hijinks. But honestly, I think they leaned a little bit too much on the pacing, the plotting, and the structure and the plot elements of the previous film. And at the end, it just feels like you've watched the same movie but worse.
He probably has the same opinion of that he does the Santa Claus 1, 2, and 3.
Yeah, Santa Claus 1 and 2 I liked, but 3, cash grab.
The Escape Clause, come on.
Soulless, and lacking in art. There's no merit in the Escape Clause. All right, so to rank these movies, I think Con Air is that's got to be one, right?
Of the movies, yes. I thought that
of the movies that are listed.
Yes.
So National Treasure, Con Air, Guarding Test, which I haven't seen, Gone in 60 Seconds, Clear and Present Danger, and Patriot Games. I don't think you mentioned any other ones.
You mentioned The Firm as well.
Oh, The Firm. Okay, I haven't.
I watched that sometime around the time.
Right? There's no way I watched The Firm.
No, I watched that sometime around when it came out, but that was one of those movies that like my parents rented, and just because I was bored, I ended up like watching that too. Like, yeah, I probably would have put one of the movies a little bit higher, but but I think Gone in 60 Seconds might be a little bit better than where it's placed on the list, but it's not worth the argument on it. So it's okay.
I think I think it might be like I think I might go Con Air, Gone in 60 Seconds, Clear and Present Danger, National Treasure because it's so unintentionally funny. Then Patriot Games. I think is how I do it.
Yeah, maybe. Let's go to Kyle Slaby, who asks, what topic would you be more excited to hear Jake Cutler focus an entire podcast about?
My God.
John Gruden's emails or a tell-all about his time playing for Adam Gase?
This is not close.
No,
absolutely
not
Adam Gase.
even close. It has to be Adam Gase.
Are you kidding me? You're asking me if I want to be hanging on his every word or carving my eyeballs out with a spoon. Like, those are the options you gave me.
Yeah, I don't need to hear him talking about John Gruden's emails with a guest that all they do is just sit and like agree with each other for an hour.
Like, I don't want to hear someone at some point saying, when John Gruden said blank, he had a point. I don't need that.
No, that is not something we need in our lives. Let me be perfectly clear. Let's go to Chris, who asks, which sports media personality would you like to attempt to give fantasy football advice for each of the Norse Code leagues?
Oh my God. Okay.
I'm holding out for the ESPN guy to see the league at some point.
Matthew Berry. Yeah.
I want Matthew Berry to at least see it and acknowledge its existence and be horrified by it. Maybe not write a full column, but I'm aiming for the stars here.
Yeah, so I think genuine answer is probably Matthew Berry. My answer, I think, is Chris Sims, because he's the only person who I think would find a way to give bad advice about the league. Like, it's hard to predict what's going to happen in this league, but if you, I think he could find a way, and that it would be fun to hear him like talk about it, because like, what would he say even? Yeah, that rules. I like that one.
Yeah, that could be entertaining. Let's go to Kevin, who asked, for a Reef's Cooking Science Corner, why does my mac and cheese recipe need a roux? When I skip making a roux, I get gloopy mac and cheese. He gets gloopy cheese milk, rather. At a molecular level, how does this work?
So I have been preparing my whole life for this question because I watched way too many food science videos. So the reason is because the proteins in cheese, they vary in terms of how tightly wound around the structures or the molecules in the cheese. So tightly wound proteins will squeeze out more water, which is how you get harder cheeses with sharper flavors, but they will hold on to the fat. They will hold on to the water on their own as they act as kind of a binder in the cheese's normal state. When you heat up the cheese, those proteins separate, and now you've got oil and water, essentially, or fat and water together. And so you've got these clumps of the proteins that are sticking together. You've got the oil floating on top, and you've got water. So that's what happens there. Now, lower fat cheeses have longer protein strands, which is why they've got this larger web, which is why you can kind of melt those and get away with it a little bit more. But the reason you want it in mac and cheese, the reason why you want a roux, which is composed of a fat, usually butter or neutral oil, and flour, the reason why you want that is because the starch in the flour will operate to emulsify. So the starch molecules are very long and then will wrap around the fat it's being cooked in with the roux, and then the liquids in the cheese. And so that's what creates the smooth and creamy mac and cheese that you get. I'll link an article from Sola El Wali, who used to be on Bon Appetit before they had their scandal, but is a food science expert, that she wrote a piece for The Kitchen about why is my mac and cheese oily instead of creamy? And so that piece goes into it a little bit too. But it's kind of one of the things that if you watch like a bunch of like Good Eats with Alan Brown, or you watch a bunch of some of the YouTube that I watch with like Serious Eats, with J. Kenzie Lopez Alt, that just like comes up a lot. So yeah, it's so that the flour can bind to all the various parts in cheese, because when the proteins break apart, they don't naturally want to stick together, which is how you get gloppy cheese milk.
All right, let's go to the final question, which is from Don from Ohio. He asks, I haven't asked this before, but will Norse Code do a special Patreon broadcast of the movie? And I just had it up here. It's called Bingo Hell. It's perfect, and it was just released on Amazon Prime. Yes. It's wild that is a 2021 movie. It's so perfect for the pod. Yeah, he said, I wouldn't want Kyle Slaby to miss this. So to answer your question, yes. Should we just pencil this in for the bye week? Yeah, that sounds about right. Yeah, that sounds good. Yeah, Patreon people will get a special... a laugh tracks. Yeah, a little riff tracks thing of this they can watch along with. We'll do this, and maybe the episode of Chopped with Dusty's husband on it. So it'll be fun. All right, that's gonna be it for this episode of Norse Code. Hope you guys have enjoyed it. Reef, what do you have to plug?
So up at The Athletic, I've got a piece breaking down elements of the Carolina Panthers defense that the Vikings will need to overcome. So that'll be up soon, hopefully. I haven't finished writing it yet, so hopefully. And you can find that at theathletic.com/author/Arif-Hassan. Otherwise, yeah, just follow me on Twitter at Arif-Hassan NFL.
All right, that is going to be it for this episode of Norse Code. Hope you guys have enjoyed it. We will be back next week where we are going to be reviewing this game, and hopefully it's a victory. So for Arif, my name is James. Thank you guys so much for listening. And please remember, case cookus. And we will be back next week. Norse Code is the largest and only division of Norse Code LLC. You can find Norse Code on the Daily Norseman, SB Nation's official Vikings blog, at dailynorseman.com. You can also find it on iTunes, Spotify, YouTube, Stitcher, or wherever fine podcasts are aggregated. Our Vikings blogger extraordinaire and generally useful human is Arif Hassan, and he can be found on Twitter at Arif Hassan NFL. You can also find his written work at theathletic.com. I am your podcast host and producer, and my name is James Pagashnik. You can find me at the show's official Twitter feed at NorseCodeDN or my personal account at BigMono. If you'd like to donate a few bucks to the show, you can make your one-time donation at paypal.me/NorseCode, or you can make a recurring monthly contribution by visiting patreon.com/NorseCode. A donation of $3.50 per month does get you bonus material from the show and much more. Any questions or comments that won't fit in a tweet can be sent to norsecodepodcast@gmail.com. On behalf of the Norse Code staff, we thank you so much for listening.
Our formula is this. We go out, we hit people in the mouth.